Well, we are getting to the closing conversation now. We are going to share the insights on the necessary transformation required to build back better, following on our completed research. We are going to have Andrew and Dimitar here. I'm going to introduce them in a minute. Actually, Dimitar will explain how the Sustainable Brands Transformational Roadmap enables brands to assess their maturity across 5 critical sustainability dimensions, which are the ones that we used in the research that we are sharing. And Andrew is going to talk about the new book he's actually writing with Paul Polman on being net positive, which aligns to our definition of a sustainable brand when it has achieved level 5 across the 5 critical sustainability dimensions. And I see they are over there, so I'm going to introduce them properly. Hi, Dimitar. Hi, Andrew. So good to see you. Let me introduce them, please. We have with us Andrew Winston. He's a globally recognized expert on megatrends and how to build companies that thrive by serving the world. Named to Thinkers 50 Radar Class of 2020, as a thinker to watch, his views on strategy have been sought after by many of the world's leading companies, including 3M, DuPont, Johnson & Johnson, Marriott, PepsiCo, Unilever. He's actually the author of the bestsellers Green to Gold and The Big Pivot, which I've read, and they are amazing, by the way. Hopefully you've read them as well. His latest book is Net Positive, How Courageous Companies Thrive by Giving More Than They Take, co-authored with the renowned CEO Paul Polman. And he's also a respected speaker, reaching audiences of thousands at executive meetings and around the world. So, Andrew, so good to have you back.
It's good to be here. Gracias por invitarme a este importante evento. That's it, and I appreciate you letting me speak in English.
Tu español is getting better every day, and really, so you just need to take some holidays here.
Exactly.
Like Dimitar. Dimitar, let me introduce Dimitar. He's also a close friend. He's actually the director of knowledge and insights at Sustainable Brands Global. He's the senior sustainability, regeneration, and brand transformation expert at Sustainable Brands. He holds a master's degrees in management science and engineering from Stanford and a bachelor in economics and mathematics from Oberlin College. And before entering the field of sustainability, Dimitar worked as well in international development at the International Monetary Fund and also in economic consulting. So welcome, both of you, and thanks for being here with us for this closure, special closure with you too. Muchas gracias. And well, I'd like first to just open the conversation so the audience know where we are with Dimitar a bit. With the Dimitar, I don't know if you would be so kind to share briefly this orientation and navigation tool that we use at Sustainable Brands. It's not an assessment to look great in the photo, it's really an orientation and navigation tool. And I think that then we'll be able to understand better what Andrew is going to tell us, yeah? Because he's going to speak about net positive. And I think it will be helpful if you can just make some headlines for us. Thanks, Dimitar.
Thank you so much, Sandra. That sounds good. It's a delight to be here. It's an absolute pleasure to be in the same session as Andrew. I will share just a quick memory. I attended Sustainable Brands for the first time in 2012. And at that point, I was an intern and a volunteer. And I later joined the organization, and I have been working there for 9 years now. But, you know, as a volunteer, entering the Sustainable Brands community in June 2012, one of the first things I saw when I went there to that conference was Andrew Winston on the main stage giving a keynote. And he has been one of my heroes since then to this day. So what a delight. And Sandra, thank you for hosting me and us for this session. Sure, I'm happy to spend a few minutes giving a very quick overview, very quick of the SB brand transformation roadmap. I know that most of the session will have a conversation, but for orientation, as you say, let me do that. So as you said, it is, and as the name suggests, it is an orientation and navigation tool, this brand transformation roadmap. It was created by the Global Advisory Board of Sustainable Brands, co-led by myself and Mr. Kevin Hagen. And the goal there is to paint the whole journey all the way from business as usual or doing very little to nothing on sustainability, all the way to what it truly means to be a sustainable brand in a sustainable company. And those two go hand in hand, by the way. You cannot be one without the other and vice versa. And we created a whole theory of change and a whole description of the entire journey. And we wanted to be very specific about the entire journey. The journey happens over these 5 dimensions that are illustrated here by 5 key characteristics of what it means to be a truly sustainable brand. So let's start there for just a moment. So this is the destination. I said journey, right? Think of this as the destination. If you become a fully sustainable brand and company, what will you have achieved? What do you have? Well, these 5 things. So what they are. So first, if you're a sustainable brand, you would have a clearly defined, articulated, fully embedded, and fully activated positive purpose, environmental or social or both. Secondly, you would have consistently leveraged the power of brand influence, especially through marketing and communications and PR, but also other types of stakeholder engagement to drive a systemic shift toward a more sustainable world. So influencing all of your stakeholders and your customers and employees above all to transform together, okay? So using that brand influence, that's the second one. Number 3, a sustainable brand would operate in a way that ensures the health, resilience, and flourishing of society and the environment, does no harm in any way to either of those. And this is very important, it acts to regenerate or restore parts of nature and society as necessary for the overall functioning of the whole system, parts of nature and society that we have harmed or degenerated way too much. So that's about operations and supply chain. Fourth, sustainable brands would deliver products and services that result in sustainable outcomes throughout the whole life cycle of the product, all the way and including what happens after the end of life of that product or service. Finally, a sustainable brand would demonstrate the kind of governance, especially through transparency, integrity, and proactive leadership. And I know we'll talk more about what that means, such that it has no conflicts or misalignment between governance and leadership inside the company and anything it does outside the company, and such that it fully supports the other 4 pillars or 4 dimensions that I just described. So that's the destination. If you have achieved all of those 5 things as a company, according to our framework here and this theory of change, we say, congratulations, you are a sustainable brand and a sustainable company. But of course, that's a very tall order. Almost nobody is there yet as a company. We could discuss and debate, for example, whether amazing companies like Patagonia or Interface, which we had earlier today, are there or not all the way. Some are very close, but in the larger picture, very few companies are close to achieving that. So that's why we decided it would be particularly helpful with that destination in mind that I just described to then look at the journey. So here's a quick visual that shows the journey. So if you think of the 5 characteristics that together define a sustainable brand that I just listed a minute ago, think of that as level 5, sustainable brand. So that is the destination, okay? And then there is a journey in each of the 5 dimensions, a purpose journey, a brand influence journey, an operations and supply chain journey, products and services journey, and a governance journey. So it's 5 journeys from wherever you are now as a company to that destination. So that is the core framework. And together, these 5 journeys together make one big journey. The benefit of this tool is that we break down the journey into very practical, step-by-step, descriptions of all the levels along the journey. So level 1 is doing nothing, business as usual. You're not really engaging very much with sustainability or regeneration in any way. And then level 5, I described a minute ago, is you being a sustainable branding company. We don't have time to explore all the details of what's in every level, of course, in these 5 areas. We have a whole longer workshop, an hour or even 2 hours sometimes, where we discuss these things at length. But here, for the purposes of a quick introduction, I think this works. And then just a couple more points before I bring it back to Sandra and Andrew. As you can probably already imagine, any given company can be anywhere along each of the 5 journeys, right? And in fact, companies are usually not the same level, along the 5 journeys. They can be advanced in one journey. In this example, company X is advanced in governance, pretty advanced on purpose and operations and supply chain, but not so great on, let's say, brand influence and products and services. And so it's really interesting to look at each journey on its own and then the 5 of them together. A lot of insight comes from that alone. And then let me just share, we have had more than 100 companies who have taken the self-assessment to see where they are on the journey, right? So there is an assessment and a bunch of other answers that come with the full usage of this tool. I think it would be very interesting. I know, Sandra, you were going to ask me in a moment, so I'm just going to share it now.
Yeah, fine.
So that we have it in front of us. Where are companies along this journey, right? So before that, I described it conceptually in that graphic a moment ago, but here, now 5 slides with the distributions of where the companies are. So we have had more than 100 companies. These are mostly big multinational global companies from a range of industries. Most of them are Sustainable Brands corporate members, a lot of consumer-facing big brands that everybody would recognize. So it's 100 companies, but you can think of it as an approximation for the Fortune 500 companies. It's a very similar profile. Okay, in terms of who they are and what industries, and it's like that. Okay, so you see a very similar story play out, and I'll just take maybe 30 more seconds just to show you. This is the results for the purpose dimension. You see the levels at the bottom, level 1 to 5, right? You see most companies on purpose are still on level 1 or level 2, more than 65% combined over there. We also see there are some leaders at level 5, so that's amazing. So again, these are companies like Ben & Jerry's and like Allbirds and some of the companies truly leading on purpose. But what's interesting is not too many followers immediately following them at level 4 and level 3. So there is this U shape. And then similar results. So this is brand influence. So this is how you use your brand to influence your consumers and other stakeholders. As you see, very similar picture, even more at the beginning levels, even fewer in the middle, and some leaders at level 5, which is great, but not enough followers. And I know we'll talk about that a little bit later. Operations and supply chain, it gets even more interesting here. Even more at the beginning of the journey, very few have achieved level 5 here, very, very few. Nobody at level 4, as you see. So basically almost everyone's getting started on operations and supply chain, in the context of the whole journey. Products and services, very similar to operations and supply chain, virtually the same. And then governance, the last one, is a little bit different. Here we see a little bit different of a distribution. More companies are at the high levels of achievement. Here you see significantly more at level 4 and 5. But still, most are still at the beginning of the journey. So I just wanted to share that. We can. I know we'll have a conversation about a lot of these things, but that's where we are. So that's why this kind of tool and this kind of roadmap is really important to consider the whole journey, because most companies are still at the beginning of the journey and they need help with orientation, seeing the whole journey, and navigation, getting specific guidance on how to advance. Obviously, Andrew is a world-class expert in helping companies do that, so I'm sure he'll share a lot. And he'll talk a lot about level 5, which is a lot of the net positive qualities of companies are basically level 5. But that's my introduction. Back to you, Sandra.
Great, great insights, Dimitar. Thanks very much. I think you set very well the stage for the conversation. So I'm coming to Andrew now. Andrew, actually, many companies are working toward being less bad, reducing the impacts that they create. But your vision, Andrew, is one of net positive. No? It's that number 5 that we had on the scale with Dimitar. Tell us about the book, please, you are currently writing, and what it means for you to be net positive. And maybe we have the book there. Oh, yeah. So in case anybody is interested, it looks great going to read it. Andrew.
Great. Thank you so much, Sandra, and thank you, Dimitar. Dimitar, I don't know if you remember this, but so I guess Sustainable Brands created this 5x5 it's been a few years now.
Yeah.
And I think I was the first one to borrow it and use it and do it in Spanish.
In Colombia, I think, no? In Colombia, Andrew, yeah. I remember.
Amazing.
I worked with an energy company in Colombia. They translated it. I spoke in English, but they did the workshop kind of working with it in Spanish. And I followed it a little bit. What's interesting about those scores, by the way, is that for the most part, anybody saying they're 5 is wrong. And you saw some really interesting distribution there, where I loved the ones that had nothing on 4 and a few people on 5, because I think once you start overestimating, you go to 5. I think the people that say they're 2 and 3 are probably being a little harsh on themselves, but are closer to accurate. I mean, as you said, Dimitar, there's no one really at level 5. This is the North Star, and this is similar to what we talk about in our new book about net positive. It's a similar kind of definition to a sustainable brand, and we have kind of our own 5 or 6 step progression that we don't talk about in the book, but was kind of in our thinking as we wrote it, where it's more in the traditional terms of compliance to philanthropy to CSR, and then ending up at net positive. And so let me define kind of what we mean by that, because people have used the phrase net positive like they do carbon positive or carbon negative, which confusingly is the same thing. And they generally talk about, just carbon, just, climate change. And I think what's good about Sustainable Brands version is to have the 5 categories to say that you're moving on this journey in a number of dimensions of the business. So our definition kind of, straight out of the book is a net positive business is one that is improving the well-being for everyone it impacts, everyone it touches, really at all scales, meaning every product, every operation or facility, every region or country they operate in, and really every stakeholder. So that's employees, suppliers, communities, customers, and even if you extend your thinking to future generations as a stakeholder and the planet as a stakeholder. And this is the North Star, right? This is the goal, is that your impact is always positive. And by definition, really no company is there yet. The systems aren't in place to allow you to be net positive on most dimensions, right? There's no grid in the world that's entirely renewable yet. I mean, we're going to get there. We don't have everything in place yet. But this is the goal, and it means rethinking the purpose of business from being maximizing shareholder value in the short run to serving the world, to serving multiple stakeholders, not just shareholders, and doing well for shareholders because you're doing this. The bottom line, the ultimate question that we're asking in this book is the world better off because your business is in it? And if you can't find a way to yes, then what are you doing? And it's something I've been thinking about personally as I wrote this with Paul Pullman about my own role in the world, and how do you know if you're net positive? And these are tough questions to measure. And I'll just say finally on the definition of this for us, that I think critical distinction in what we call level 5 or 6, whatever you want to call it, is not just the positive impact, but a particular focus on systems transformations. So it isn't just your own impacts, and can you go beyond, maybe making a little more energy in your facilities than you need, so you're having a positive impact. It's, are you working with your sector, with a region on transforming the energy system or transforming the way packaging works in your industry, et cetera. And, there's many dimensions of this we talk about in the book. And I think we'll get into that in the kind of rest of the questions about partnerships. But it's really about changing systems and thinking at that scale. And no matter how big your business is, everybody has systems they're part of, even if they're smaller, even if they're local. They have a local system, a local government, even if they're not working with the national government. So let me leave it there for now. And I think you'll see as we talk about it, kind of what we mean in practice.
That's great, Andrew. And could I ask you before we start the dialogue, just curious about, what's your objective with the book? I mean, your objective, because I know you, I can see it. Paul's objective. I mean, what would be a success? I mean, apart from selling books, which I guess it's not the reason why you do this, but what is your objective when you decide, you and Paul Polman, to just let's write this?
Yeah, I mean, the quick answer is we want to start a movement, right? We want that the language of net positive is what everybody's using. I don't frankly care too much about the specific words, but that the ideas of the subtitle includes, giving more than you take. If people want to talk about it that way, that's fine. If they don't like some sustainability people don't like the phrase net positive because of it can seem like greenwashing, or and as we've defined it, we're not talking about offsetting one thing from another, and it's much more complicated and nuanced than that. But our goal is a movement, right, where the business community rethinks its function in society at scale, right? And that's why we keep coming back to systems. And for Paul, I can't speak for him fully. You can read the preface and kind of his personal comments. It's partly legacy. I mean, he's already was the CEO of one of the world's great companies for 10 years, but he's now working with this group Imagine that he co-founded with a few peers, with a bunch of CEOs, and they're trying to change systems. So he's trying to work at that scale. So for him, it's not book sales, right? He doesn't need exposure. He doesn't need, money, frankly. It's about the change in the system. And that's fundamentally mine too. Personally, I'd like to, just on my own transformation and journey, is expand on the impact I've had on business and have a bigger one if I can, and play a bigger role in changing how companies think about themselves and what their role is. And then the ultimate goal of that movement is that we really tackle fundamentally climate and inequality, and biodiversity as a kind of third grand challenge. If we're not solving those, then it's just a lot of nice reports from companies saying they're going to be net positive. We have to start seeing the metrics, like parts per million in the atmosphere, like really big metrics, that we have to start seeing them turn to the better to know that we're getting anywhere. And there's intermediate metrics. How many companies have a science-based target? How many are on their way? I mean, there's good metrics along the way, but we have to start seeing, the number of people living in poverty going down, the number of people living in free democracies going up, the number of people working in modern slavery going to zero. It comes down to the SDGs. I mean, that's kind of Paul's vision. It's the underlying current in everything we do is, are we solving for those, the sustainable development goals or the global goals, are we reaching those as a society? Are we getting to those 16 categories with partnership being the 17th? And if we're not, then it doesn't matter how many books we sell, right? It just, who cares? So that's the long version of a movement. That's the short answer.
Many thanks for sharing that, Andrew. Nice to hear. Dimitar, it all starts with purpose, no? Yeah. Based on our research, the new paradigm of purpose, it's all about a clear delivery point, simple, actionable, a transformational promise that really connects to people, to stakeholders, to citizens. No, we were speaking previously about the learning from the doing. No, we must think about it. Of course, we must reflect on it. But at some point, we need to just go and do, no? And that is even more important now, no? And as well, we were speaking about with the interviews that we did about how to try to have a contagious purpose amongst employees, no? How important that was before attempting to communicate externally, no? I think that you have a privileged view as well of many brands in the world. What do you think have been our largest mistakes in purpose for the last years? What for you would be like the key learning or the key learnings that you've extracted from all what you've seen?
Great question. Thank you, Sandra. And before I start, I'd just like to say I'm a big fan of the Build Back Better study. And I highly recommend it. If anyone watching this has not read it or is not familiar with it, I highly recommend it. Okay, so to your question, what are our largest mistakes around purpose that I have seen companies make? I will point out three common mistakes that we see. One is that sometimes the purpose is not specific enough, and therefore not inspiring enough, or not, as we like to say sometimes, not sticky enough. It doesn't stick to your mind enough, and there is a very nice phrase in English that when you try to do too much, you try to boil the ocean. So sometimes companies try to boil the ocean with their purpose and make it about everything, or make it very vague, like we will leave a better world to our children. And that's amazing. We want to do that. It's just that when it's on that level of abstraction or vagueness and not specific enough, it can be difficult to engage with it or to get inspired by it, whether you are a consumer of that company or an employee or even a leader of the company. So that's one. Another one is not being integrated enough in the approach. For example, a few minutes ago, when I was describing the purpose journey in our roadmap, I said, when you arrive at the destination purpose, you have not only defined it, articulated it, but very important, you have fully embedded it inside the company and activated it outside the company with external stakeholders. Of course, starting with consumers and customers, but also all others. So when it's not fully embedded or integrated, then it can break down very quickly, So it doesn't translate into specific actions. It doesn't translate into how different departments and teams around the company see their work, and how to apply the purpose to their work. And it becomes something that's very nice to have in a statement, on the wall, online, on social media, but not fully integrated into the actual work of all the teams and departments in the company. So that sounds simple, but that continues to happen too often. So that's a frequent mistake, that it's not embedded well inside the whole company. And then finally, I think in the process of embedding it, many companies don't have a lot of imagination yet about new types of employee engagement to excite employees and to inspire them. I will quote one of my favorite types of activities that I know Unilever did a few years ago, and maybe some other companies have done as well. But Unilever at one point, and they've been public about this, so it's well known, they held a workshop inside, and this was Unilever US, at least the US, trying to connect personal purpose for their employees to the purpose of some of the product brands, their sustainable living brands, and ultimately Unilever as a whole. And giving employees that kind of bridge to engaging with the company purpose through their own personal, individual purpose of what they want to do with their lives, sharing their dreams and aspirations as a purpose on an individual level, that's amazing. So that kind of workshop is an innovative kind of activity with employees that is not often enough yet seen as one strong tool of employee engagement, So tools like that would help a lot, just more imagination, spice up the employee engagement. So those are the main ones that I see.
Many thanks, Dimitar. Actually, it's one of the cases we've included in the study, that one that you mentioned from Unilever. Very interesting, connecting the personal purpose with the purpose of the company. It's amazing. Andrew, I wanted to ask you like a very practical question, but how do you think a company can get started on this road to net positive? I liked what you said before as well about metrics, no? Because if we don't measure, we cannot really see where we are, no? But I leave it there. It's not an easy question.
Well, I mean, and it's been a big question as we're thinking about the book going out and creating a movement is you can say, here's the things a net positive company does, and that's the core of the book, but there's a bunch of kind of inputs or starting points or data that has to kind of go into that, whether a company's ready to start talking about, aggressive goals, for example. And so there's some basic stuff like, what's your footprint? Where's your impacts along your value chain? And the leading companies are years into this, right? But I still am working with companies at times that really haven't done this yet or haven't had a factory audit or a dumpster dive to see where their waste is, to just understand their current footprint and impacts, both human and environmental. So that's the start of whether it's net positive or just whatever you want to call it, sustainability, anything. The first step is just knowing where you are. And there's some great support tools like the Sustainable Accounting Standards Board with their materiality lists by sector, the Sustainability Consortium that Walmart started years ago with 100 or 110 different products and where the hot spots in the footprint are. Like, you can figure this out directionally, but you have to start to get the tools in place to measure. And I think that sounds easier than it's turned out to be for a lot of companies. And there's still the range of where companies are on this is just vast. And so that's kind of the starting point. And to know where your people are, to know how engaged they are, start to survey them, start to understand their needs and desires, start to map out the hurdles and problems that stand in the way of you doing better as a sector or as a business. What are there's not enough renewables on the grid near me, or there's not a recycling infrastructure for my materials. You start to figure out the problems. So that's kind of all the basics in a way. And then, so our book in a way kind of skips over that and says, you got to get all that. But then the starting point that we begin with is really very personal, and to just build exactly on what Dimitar was just talking about. Unilever did, in fact, start with this development program for their top executives. Our book, the first step is really like the chapter we is titled "How Much Do You Care?" And it's really aimed at the CEO or the leader, the person reading this, to say, do you care? I mean, do you understand the issues in the world, the climate, biodiversity, inequality? Do you understand that what's going on? And do you care about it? I mean, that's kind of Paul's fundamental question to people. And if you don't, you're probably not going to go very far on this journey, right? You have to actually care that there's vast inequality or that the climate is in deep trouble. And so then very quickly you get to purpose discussions. And so Unilever did 10 years ago start with a development program for the leaders, starting with the top 100, where they took them through a week-long process of discovering their purpose, their own journey. They expanded it to the kind of top 1,000 executives. And over years, they developed a shorter, quicker program for every employee, and something like 60 or 70,000 people have done it. And it is that process Dimitar talks about of what's my purpose, where do I want to be, and how does that connect to the company's overall discussion. For Unilever, it's making sustainable living commonplace. And there's plenty of great mission statements out there from a lot of companies, and I think it's about people finding their connection to that. So it starts really with inside. We have to start with who we are and who the organization is. So not just the people, but the organization itself. Unilever, Paul went back to their history, the founding, the original writings of the founder. And I think every company can do that to some extent and say, what were we founded for? Why? What was our purpose? What problem were we trying to solve? And just see what does that connect to today's needs. So those are kind of the starting points. And then we'll kind of, I think, come back to later, it builds towards things like setting really aggressive goals and getting towards partnerships. I mean, that's the ultimate goal of becoming a net positive company, is to engage in deep broad partnerships on a bunch of issues. And it's something companies are not regularly trained for or used to, but it's kind of what has to happen now. Our problems are just way too big. There's no company large enough to solve any problem that we're talking about. Walmart's tiny compared to the scale of all energy use or all, transportation of goods. It doesn't matter how big you are. You're not big enough to solve it alone. So I think part of that getting started is that kind of realization and understanding of the system, and that what needs to happen is a much more open view of your role in the world and how much you need to work with others.
Many thanks, Andrew, for the good summary. If we forgot who we are, maybe that's a key pillar of all our problems, no? Right now, as organizations and as persons as well, no? Okay. Dimitar, linking a bit to the partnership area and that Andrew was as well commenting on, the new paradigm of brand influence is based on new forms of leadership, no? That go beyond their own company, really, to generate those systemic changes in the industry that build powerful relations with consumers, with the stakeholders, based on a set of authentic values and join in and push forward existing social movements, no? Would you tell us about a brand or some brands that for you are successfully actually doing this in the brand influence dimension?
Sure. I already mentioned, I think, a couple
Yes.
as I was introducing the roadmap a few minutes ago. I will mention a few more, and there are many, but I will tell you some of my personal current favorites.
You've seen a lot, so.
Yeah. So, some of them are really big multinationals. So I'm a big fan of IKEA and their ambition to be fully circular by 2030. I'm a big fan of Danone, for example, another one from a different industry. I'm a big fan of the latest regeneration announcements by companies like Timberland and General Mills and the Target and Walmart even on that dimension are giving hope. Starbucks announced that they want to be resource negative, and so what does that mean? That's another term. It's in the neighborhood of net positive, or and so forth, but and regenerative. But probably the most inspiring one, Sandra, to give you just a few more names, and my top favorites these days tends to be just at the moment. And again, I'm speaking only for myself here, not for sustainable brands or anything like that. But for me, it's some of the B Corps, some of the best B Corps, like Tony's Chocolonely, which we had earlier in the program. Companies like Allbirds, I mentioned, Patagonia, companies like Guayaki, who are doing amazing regenerative work, both environmentally and socially. In their supply chain in South America, they source the produce there, and then they make these amazing, tasty beverages like Guayaki juice and mate. So these are some of my favorites. I'll mention just one more because it represents an important category that is among my favorites. I'm a big fan of Impossible Foods. And Beyond Meat, because they represent a big promise for us to enjoy, really tasty burgers without having to torture animals for that. So, I don't know if that helps, Sandra.
We have a lot in common. We had actually Beyond Meat, and Seth Goldman was here a couple of years ago. Amazing guy. So, Andrew, I wanted to ask you about the palm oil case. I know that you know the case very well, and I think we can have very nice learnings from that one. Would you share a bit with us headlines on that?
Yeah, so it was one of the process of doing this book. I learned a lot. I mean, I've been in this field for a lot of years, but I dug in on some issues and dug deeper with Unilever. I mean, the book is not just about Unilever, but obviously with Paul, that's the majority of the cases. But I spoke to people all over the world in the organization and just got a deeper sense of the different issues, in different markets and how companies manage them. And the book, as I said, builds to partnerships. And really, to me, the ultimate story, the end of kind of the partnership systems chapter is palm oil. And the reason is that palm oil is almost like a perfect storm of an issue. It is contributing, one of the largest contributors to greenhouse gases because we cut down forests. Indonesia and Malaysia are major contributors to emissions, not virtue of their size of economy, but from cutting down forests, basically for palm oil. And it's the same set of issues in Brazil and elsewhere for cutting down for soy, for cattle. And it's tied to inequality. It's tied to poverty. Like people have to cut down forests so they can grow stuff to either eat directly or to create energy or to grow to sell. And it's tied to biodiversity. It's tied to pandemics. We get closer and closer to nature. We get, it's tied to everything. And it's incredibly complicated. And it's been something that they've worked on in the sector for 15 years. There's been goals from the big buyers. Unilever is the largest buyer of palm oil in the world. But as I said before, even being the largest buyer in the world, they're only 3%. So they can't control this market. And in fact, the major brands, the ones that are at Sustainable Brands things all the time, the Unilevers and P&Gs, and they've been doing pretty well with buying from providers who are following more sustainable practices, but there's still vast kind of unbranded buyers all over the world for low quality, low price goods, and they don't care about the sustainable, palm oil certifications. So what's ended up happening over years of, frankly, failure. I mean, I talked to Greenpeace. It didn't accomplish much in terms of reducing deforestation. Is in the last few years, there's actually finally been a reduction in deforestation. And the reason is, after talking to a bunch of people around this issue, is the nature of the partnership was finally systemic. So they do what's called in this realm jurisdictional approach to rethinking agriculture, rethinking kind of communities and livelihoods. So you go into a smallish area. It isn't like let's talk to the whole country, but it's a handful, maybe hundreds, not thousands and thousands of farmers. And you bring them better practices, species that give you 2 times the yield so they don't have to cut down more forest. But it isn't enough for Unilever to say, we only want to buy from you if you do this, because they can't just do it. They need financing, right, to transition to better practices, just like you do in organic foods. So they had to bring in Norway's sovereign fund, Unilever and others put some money up, and bring in both the local municipalities, the farmers themselves, the big buyers, the wholesalers, the banks. It's everybody. And that's really complicated, right? To get everybody on the same page and make it so that the economic incentives for people are not to cut down the forest. And they're finally having success. And this is both incredibly hopeful for me getting into this, and also kind of scary, because the lesson is how long this takes and how hard it is. And I'm hoping on other topics, agricultural especially, we will see kind of a leapfrog as people can look at these models that are working and do it quicker. But as you all know, I mean, climate-wise, we're out of time. And we can't take another 15 years on major commodities and agriculture around the world. We have very limited time to somehow stop the Amazon from tipping into a carbon sink to a carbon, producer. And it's complicated by politics, right? By the politicians leading these countries. Bolsonaro doesn't seem to care about cutting down the Amazon, and it's really hard to deal with that. So you need these really systemic groups where you've got, the NGO experts and the business and the government all in one room, working for years and developing metrics and just doing the hard work. And that's daunting, but it's also incredibly exciting, right? To see the scale of change that can happen. So to me, it's the ultimate story. It was very detailed and, wonky. I don't know what the word is in Spanish, but very process oriented, but that's the work on the ground. So I would, recommend everyone kind of get to know that story and see what we can learn.
Very interesting, Andrew. We'll have a good look at that story for sure. Dimitar, I wanted to ask you as well about governance. We've touched it a bit during the session, but we saw your numbers as well. I was impressed with the governance. How do you think governance empowers sustainability leadership inside and outside the company?
Yeah, great question, Sandra. Thank you. Before I answer, I just want to mention two more companies that I admire. One I did not mention on purpose a few minutes ago because we have been talking about them so much. Unilever, huge fan, and all of their sustainable living brands like Ben & Jerry's and Dove and so many others. And so that's great. And then the other though is Microsoft. So big fan. And to Andrew's point, I mean, I cannot name a bigger leader on climate, especially in their sector, than Microsoft, who have pledged not only to have science-based goals, not only to go then beyond that to, carbon neutral soon, but beyond that to become a carbon negative company and erase all of their historical carbon footprint, which is phenomenal. Really, really bold, ambitious leadership from them to set a tone and inspire others to do more than the minimum, and so it's a huge fan. Okay, now to your question, because I know we only have a few more minutes. I'll try to be very quick here. There's many ways that governance empowers leadership, but here's my top three. I just mentioned it, so I'll start with science-based goals. So good governance is aware of the proper level of ambition that is required at this point, but is also a win-win and a win for the company as well, to make it more resilient for the future and avoid risk. And so to do that, to set science-based goals, certainly on climate, but now there are more. Now you can set science-based goals also around water, land use and forests, and more environmental impacts. And then there's the equivalent of science-based goals also for social, like minimum living wage and other things. Okay, that's one. Second, to start training young leaders and up-and-coming leaders, the executives of tomorrow, as well as training current leaders, of course, the current, CMO and CFO and all the rest of a leadership of a typical company, but also the people coming up as future leaders to think in more complete and more transformative ways, to really break down assumptions and we're doing things because that's just the way we have been doing it, to break all that down in favor of rethinking the entire business model. I know we talked about that earlier today, and Andrew mentioned it in a few ways, but that deeper look in the mirror in every business leader, and that starts with the current governance, training current leaders and future leaders. And finally, to expand the notion of risk and opportunity, right? So to go from what one of my good friends in the field, Mark McElroy, likes to say, to go from monocapitalism to multi-capitalism. And many people say that now because it's just so great. We need to go to multi-capitalism. So think in multi-capital ways, right? As a leader and as governance in everything you do, including all the 5 areas of the roadmap. So these are the important ways.
Very good point, Dimitar, very good point. I think they are all present in the study, very good insights. Andrew, I'll ask one for you. Some companies, I think you mentioned this before, Andrew, and I think it's a very important question, and we need to address it, because some companies are really working hard to reach net zero. I don't know, for example, here in Spain, closer to us, Coca-Cola Euro Pacific partners in Europe is working already to reach net zero. We have Brambles, we have a Spanish leading team from here that they have the ambition even to become and to pioneer regenerative supply chain. But also there's been pushback lately on some companies that had previously set goals to be net zero. So my question is, some people would say that net positive is just a new form of greenwashing, no? But I know that the three of us here now, we are strongly convinced that it's not, no? What would you say to those people, Andrew? I mean, you see a lot of people every day. What would you say to those guys?
I guess I've always been less concerned about greenwashing. People use that word pretty broadly. I guess I always think of it more narrowly to mean a company knowingly saying they're doing something green and it really isn't. And maybe you'd include what's more common is companies bragging or saying, look what we did. And it's just not that relevant. Like a bank saying, look at our two-sided copying or our digital, you can go digital with your checking account versus where their money goes as their footprint. I mean, like, it's just irrelevant. So that stuff I think is maybe greenwashing. I don't know why there's such a hit on net positive. I mean, if companies have set the goal to get to zero carbon, that's what the science says, and that's what we need to do. I think where it gets less impressive is if their plan is just to buy carbon offsets or just buy renewable energy credits, because they don't really, at this point, I mean, maybe 10 years ago, a renewable energy credit would help drive, the building of renewables. That doesn't really do anything anymore. It's not providing capital that makes sure that gets built. That's why, like, a power purchasing agreement, which is what what most companies do for a chunk of their renewables, is real. It's providing a contract to buy energy so it gets built to provide that energy. But I think, the bar of what it means to be pursuing net zero and carbon is rising. Dimitar mentioned Microsoft. They are the really arguably net positive, or pursuing net positive on carbon, because they're also huge in carbon sequestration. And Google in parallel is also really up there with their goal to be 24/7 renewable, meaning by 2030, they want to be zero carbon like every hour, like on site. So a data center would have solar, wind, storage, and if anything's plugged into a local grid, the grid has to be 100% renewable or it doesn't count. That's true net zero, right? And I think we should definitely keep raising the standards of what we mean by net zero or net positive, so that the bar is actually meeting the science, not just allow people to say, look, we're neutral because they bought a bunch of renewable energy credits. So I think it's fair to be tough on companies about these statements and make sure they're living up to them. But I don't think we should just jump to, if you're saying that, then you're greenwashing. It just seems too oversimplified. I don't think there's that many companies with the intention to make it look like they're doing something they're not. I think they maybe aren't as knowledgeable as they could be about what it really takes. And that's different than willfully, fooling people.
Yeah, I think it makes a lot of sense what you say, Andrew. I mean, it's like it's a full system change, and maybe sometimes we don't realize about the scope, no? But I mean, guys, I will be here with you all afternoon, all night, all Spanish night. We would go to have a little fiesta after that. We miss you. I hope to see you soon, face to face. I'm going to do a brief recap now for the session, your session, and the rest of the day. I can just say thank you. It was so short. I want more. I hope to see you soon. Take care, please. From Spain, a big hug from Spanish to you guys.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you so much.
Gracias.